They were the golden couple of New York's elite. Caroline Astor Harrington, heir to a shipping fortune, and Gregory Vale, a charismatic art dealer with a mysterious past. Together, they lit up every ballroom and dominated every social page. But beneath the diamonds and designer smiles was something dark, something deadly, because Caroline didn't fall down the stairs. She was pushed, and the man who kissed her goodnight was the same man who lied to everyone the next morning. Gregory called 911 at 6:12 a.m. "My wife, she's not breathing. She fell. Please, God, send someone." His voice was hoarse, convincing, maybe too convincing. The officers arrived to find Caroline crumpled at the base of the stairs, neck broken, wine on her silk robe, an accident on the surface. But the first responders noticed something strange. There was no spilled wine, no broken glass, and her hands were clenched, as if she'd been fighting. Gregory Vale was, by all accounts, perfect, handsome, attentive, philanthropic. He swept Caroline off her feet during a gallery opening in Paris. The press called it a fairy tale, but the cracks began long before her body did. Caroline's closest friend, socialite Margot Dubois, would later confess that Caroline was planning to leave Gregory. "She was afraid," Margot said. "She told me. If anything happened to her, it wasn't an accident." 2 days after Caroline's death, her private attorney delivered a will, one Gregory didn't know existed. In it, Caroline revoked her previous bequest to Gregory. She left everything to her sister in Geneva. Everything. The house, the stocks, the estate. She'd signed it 3 weeks before she died. Coincidence? Or foresight? Investigators discovered something else. A man. Not Gregory. A former Olympic swimmer turned fitness trainer, Julian Mercier. He and Caroline had grown close. Very close. Julian claimed he hadn't seen her in weeks. But text messages told a different story. "I'm done pretending," Caroline had written. "Next week. It ends." Gregory had a secret too. An apartment, under a fake name. Inside, police found expensive watches, a passport under an alias, and photographs of another woman. Taken candidly, obsessively. The woman, not Caroline, not even Julian's new girlfriend. A third woman, unidentified, until they matched her to a cold case from 6 years ago. Her name was Elise Tannen. She vanished after dating a man named Greg Carter, an alias tied back to Gregory Vale. Her case was never solved. Until now, DNA from a single hair, found inside Gregory's hidden apartment, confirmed she'd been there. Recently, suddenly, Caroline's fall looked a lot more like part of a pattern. The first autopsy ruled it accidental blunt force trauma. But after the new revelations, the DA ordered a second look. This time, something stood out. Petechial hemorrhaging around the eyes, bruising on the upper arms, and the kicker? Lividity on the back, meaning she died lying down, not at the bottom of stairs. Caroline hadn't fallen. She'd been staged. Gregory claimed he and Caroline had dinner together that night. Just the two of them. But one neighbor, a retired judge with insomnia, remembered something else. She saw Gregory leaving, alone, at 11:47 p.m. Security footage confirmed it. So where did he go? And who was with Caroline when she died? A week later, a woman came forward, a former gallery intern. She'd been seeing Gregory for over a year. He said she was cold, controlling, that he was trapped. He told her something else, too, that he'd found a way to make it all go away, and that, after Caroline, they'd be free. In the weeks following Caroline's death, the case became the talk of the town. Social media was ablaze with speculation. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. But public opinion was divided. Some believed Gregory's tearful plea was genuine. Others thought the perfect husband had finally been caught. A high society man suddenly not so perfect. The whispers grew louder. The media painted Gregory as a man driven to murder by his infidelity. But no one had the full picture. Yet, Detective Emma Harper was no stranger to the shadows of high society. She'd solved cases that made headlines, but nothing quite like this. There was one thing she knew for certain. Gregory Vale was hiding something. It wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just about the will. It was about power, control, something darker. Harper followed the clues, no matter how tangled. The more she dug, the more she realized Caroline's murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was premeditated. Gregory Vale had been living a lie for years, but as the investigation deepened, he began to crack. During a tense interrogation, he slipped. "I never meant to hurt her," he said, his voice trembling. His eyes darted to the corner of the room. There was a moment, a flicker of guilt. It was all too real. But that wasn't the moment that broke the case wide open. It was his refusal to answer one simple question. Where were you the night Caroline died? A week after Gregory's interview, Harper received an anonymous tip, a journal. It was found hidden in Gregory's office, stuffed behind a row of paintings. The journal belonged to Caroline. She had written obsessively about her suspicions, about Gregory's lies, about his secret life. But in the final entry, something chilling stood out. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act. He wants everything. He wants me to disappear." Was Caroline aware of the danger? Or was she simply documenting her growing paranoia? Except, a valet reported a strange encounter. Gregory had walked out alone. And the time he left the club? It didn't match his story. With no other witnesses to confirm his whereabouts, the case turned to the one thing he had no control over: the surveillance footage. Footage from a street camera showed Gregory entering a different building at 11:40 p.m. A building no one knew he had access to. As the investigation progressed, Harper's team secured a breakthrough: DNA. Caroline's blood had been found in Gregory's secret apartment. But it wasn't just on the furniture. It was underneath it. Caroline had been dragged through the apartment, alive, before she died. She had fought him, but for how long? The mysterious disappearance of Elise Tannen was no accident. Gregory had been seeing her too, but her case went cold. A missing persons report, a dead end. But Detective Harper wasn't done. With new evidence connecting Gregory to Elise, Harper reopened the case. And that's when she discovered the chilling truth. Elise hadn't vanished at all. She had been killed, and her body was buried under Gregory's private estate. As Gregory sat in front of the jury, he seemed completely unshaken. He denied everything: the affair, the will, the murder. His story had remained the same from day one. But Harper had something Gregory hadn't counted on. The lies had started to unravel. An incriminating phone call from his assistant, made hours after Caroline's death, proved that Gregory knew exactly what had happened. He had been giving instructions, making sure the scene looked right. It wasn't Gregory who broke the case open. It was Julian. In a shocking turn, the lover finally came forward. "I didn't know what he was capable of," Julian admitted to Harper. "I thought it was just about Caroline, but then I found out about Elise." Julian had been manipulated. He had been Gregory's pawn in a game of deception, seduced by promises of wealth and status. But Gregory's manipulations ran deeper, much deeper. The trial reached its climax. The evidence was irrefutable. Gregory Vale had orchestrated the deaths of two women, Caroline and Elise. The perfect husband, the perfect liar. But the final twist? Gregory's confession came too late. In a last-ditch effort to salvage his own reputation, he confessed to everything. Too little, too late. He never expected that his confession would be used against him in the court of public opinion. And as the gavel fell, the world finally knew the truth. In the wake of Gregory's arrest, New York's elite society began to fracture. The perfect facade had been shattered. People whispered in hushed tones. The man they had admired, celebrated, he was a murderer. But even as his trial approached, there were some who still believed Gregory's innocence. They clung to the image of him they had adored for years. Charming, talented, untouchable. But Caroline's family? They wanted nothing more than to see him burn. There was one more thing Harper uncovered. A set of tapes. Old, faded, but damning. They had been recorded by Gregory himself. In the months leading up to Caroline's death, Gregory had been documenting their life together. His every move, his every thought, captured in chilling detail. On the tapes, he spoke of his affair with Caroline's sister. He spoke of the plans to inherit everything. And then a cold statement: if she gets in the way, she has to go. This was premeditation. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. As Harper dug deeper, she uncovered Gregory's double life, his carefully constructed web of deceit. He wasn't just a renowned art dealer. He was involved in illegal art deals, money laundering, and dark connections with powerful figures across Europe. His wealth had never been entirely legitimate. Gregory had been laundering money through art sales for years, using his connections to evade the law. Caroline had been his unwitting accomplice, until she became a liability. But the secrets didn't end with Gregory. Caroline's family had secrets of their own. Her sister, Victoria, had been just as much a player in this tragedy. She had known about Gregory's dark side. She had been seeing him on the side, while pretending to be loyal to Caroline. It was Victoria who had tipped Gregory off to Caroline's suspicions. It was Victoria who had planned to take Caroline's place after the murder. But the tragedy? It had cost Victoria everything. Her reputation, her family, her very soul. Caroline's past had always been shrouded in mystery. Her father, a self-made billionaire, had passed away years ago under suspicious circumstances. Rumors swirled that his death wasn't a natural one. Some believed it was the result of a business rivalry gone wrong. Others thought it was the work of someone who wanted to take control of his vast empire. Caroline had always suspected foul play, but she never dared to dig too deeply. Now, her father's death seemed more connected to her own than anyone could have imagined. As Gregory's trial continued, his defense team pulled out all the stops. They tried to paint Caroline as mentally unstable, a woman driven by jealousy and paranoia. They suggested that she had staged her own death to frame Gregory, painting him as a victim of her erratic behavior. It was a smokescreen, a desperate attempt to confuse the jury. But Harper knew better. Gregory was the puppet master, and Caroline was his final sacrifice. Then came the revelation, the discovery of a phone call that would change everything. A phone call between Gregory and a mysterious figure, a high-ranking politician in Europe. The conversation revealed something no one had expected. Gregory wasn't just killing for money or control. He was in debt, deep debt, to people far more dangerous than he could handle. Caroline and Elise weren't just obstacles to his empire. They were sacrifices to protect his life, and the lives of those he owed. On the final day of his trial, Gregory took the stand. He had been silent through most of the proceedings, but now he was ready to speak. His voice cracked as he admitted his role in Caroline's death, but he insisted that he had been forced into it, that he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. He begged the jury for mercy, but there was no mercy to be found. The weight of his lies, his manipulations, his cruelty had finally caught up with him. The room was heavy with anticipation. After weeks of testimony, evidence, and shocking revelations, the jury had finally reached a verdict. Gregory Vale was found guilty of the murders of Caroline Astor Harrington and Elise Tannen. But the questions didn't stop. Who had truly orchestrated the entire scheme? Who else was involved? The dark web of Gregory's life didn't end with him. As Gregory was sentenced to life in prison, Detective Harper received an anonymous letter. Inside was a chilling message. "You haven't uncovered the whole truth. Look closer. There's more." The handwriting was familiar, and for Harper, it sent a shiver down her spine. This was not the end. Not by a long shot. The anonymous letter sat on Detective Harper's desk like a ticking bomb. "You haven't uncovered the whole truth. Who could have sent it?" The handwriting was a match to Gregory's. But why would he confess so publicly only to drop another bombshell from behind bars? And then there was the mention of someone else. A silent partner. Someone who had been pulling strings all along, watching in the shadows. The case was far from closed. The name Elise Tannen had become synonymous with tragedy. A woman who had disappeared years ago, only to be revealed as one of Gregory's victims. But there was something no one knew about Elise. She wasn't just another pawn in Gregory's game. She had a family, a sister who had been searching for her since her disappearance. A sister who, Harper discovered, had her own suspicions about Gregory long before Elisa's body was found. The real question now, had Elisa's death been part of Gregory's plot all along? To find the truth, Harper had to turn to someone unexpected. An ex-con named Jimmy Hollis. Once a minor player in Gregory's art dealings, Jimmy had spent years in prison after a scam gone wrong. But now, with the dust settling on Gregory's conviction, Jimmy was ready to talk. "I saw things," Jimmy said. "I knew what he was capable of, but I didn't know about the bodies. Gregory never worked alone." Jimmy's eyes grew darker. "There's someone else you should be looking at. Someone close to the top of his operation. Someone who knows too much." The more Harper dug, the more Gregory's life began to seem like an intricate puzzle. The people he surrounded himself with weren't just friends. They were business partners, connections with deep ties in the underworld. It turned out that Gregory's so-called mysterious benefactor, the one who had been making threats behind closed doors, was someone much closer to home. A former associate of Caroline's father, who had vanished under suspicious circumstances years ago. The ties between the two men were uncomfortably strong. A business deal gone wrong. A murder to cover up. Harper wasn't about to give up. She spent hours combing through the case files, old police reports, statements, photographs. And there it was. A single piece of overlooked evidence, an old ledger. This ledger didn't just detail Gregory's financial transactions. It tracked a series of unusual payments to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The recipient, a name Harper didn't recognize, but what sent chills down her spine. The name was tied to a cold case from 15 years ago, the unsolved murder of Caroline's father. Victoria had always been in the shadows, overshadowed by her sister's brilliance and beauty. But now, after Caroline's death, Victoria's true nature began to emerge. She had always been envious of Caroline's wealth, her social standing. And when it became clear that Gregory wasn't as loyal as she had thought, Victoria began to look at her sister as more than just family. She was an obstacle that needed to be removed for Victoria to claim her rightful place. The question lingered. Had she been involved in her sister's murder from the beginning? Had she been pulling the strings all along? Gregory, now a prisoner, had nothing left to lose. But he wasn't the one pulling the final strings. As Harper continued to investigate, it became clear that Gregory's death wasn't the end of the game. In fact, it was just the beginning. Someone had orchestrated everything, the affairs, the murders, the lies. Someone had played Gregory like a pawn. The truth would ultimately point to Victoria, Caroline's own sister. She had orchestrated the entire thing, manipulating Gregory into carrying out her twisted plans, all while keeping herself out of the spotlight. The pieces were falling into place, and the reality was more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Victoria's ambition knew no bounds. She had made sure Gregory was just a tool, a means to an end. Their affair had never been about love. It was about control. And with Caroline dead, Victoria could finally take her place at the head of the empire. But Gregory had one fatal flaw. He wasn't as blind as Victoria thought. He had begun to realize the full extent of her manipulations. And the moment he saw it, he became a loose end. So Victoria made sure he didn't last long. The confrontation was inevitable. Harper had spent months piecing together the clues, and now she had the one person left to confront, Victoria. In a private meeting, Victoria admitted it all. Her jealousy of Caroline, her need for control, and her willingness to do anything to get what she wanted. "I didn't kill her," Victoria said coldly, "but I sure as hell orchestrated it." The truth came out in pieces like shattered glass, falling to the floor. As the defense tried to paint her as an innocent bystander, the prosecution laid out the evidence. Victoria had manipulated everyone around her, including her own sister. Gregory, the once perfect husband, was nothing more than a pawn in her game. The verdict was swift. Guilty. Victoria Vale was sentenced to life in prison, her dreams of power and wealth shattered. But even in prison, the final twist remained. As she was escorted away in handcuffs, Victoria whispered to Harper, "You still don't know the full truth." Victoria Vale had been sentenced to life without parole, but she wasn't done yet. Months into her sentence, she requested a private meeting with Detective Harper. No one else, just the two of them. Harper arrived, skeptical, but determined to hear what Victoria had to say. As the door clicked shut behind her, Victoria's face remained emotionless, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. "You don't understand, Harper," Victoria said softly. "I didn't just want power. I wanted to be free. I wanted to be someone." She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "The truth is not just about Gregory. It's about something much bigger than both of us." Victoria's confession wasn't as simple as Harper had expected. There was a new layer to the story, a secret that no one had known about. Gregory hadn't been the first to cross her. No, the real villain in her life was someone far more powerful. Someone who had forced her hand. Her own father before his death. Caroline's father had been involved in shady dealings, not just with art, but with a powerful criminal syndicate. And Victoria, in her desperation, had been pulled into it. She confessed that the entire plot to murder Caroline had been engineered to protect herself from this hidden enemy. The syndicate had made it clear, if she didn't get Caroline out of the picture, the entire family would be wiped out. Victoria had never been the mastermind, but she had been the pawn in a much larger game. The syndicate that had controlled her family's wealth and secrets for decades had left their fingerprints all over Caroline's death. They were the ones who had orchestrated the final steps of the plan, ensuring that Caroline was out of the way and that Gregory was manipulated into doing their bidding. Harper could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was it all about money? Or had it been something more dangerous, something more sinister? Could this entire family have been nothing more than a tool for organized crime? Harper's investigation took a turn toward the shocking as she uncovered something more damning. A symbol hidden in plain sight. A symbol that had been embedded into various artworks that Gregory had sold over the years. A subtle marking that was tied to the criminal syndicate, one that no one had noticed until now. The symbol was no accident. It was a signature, a silent marker that indicated which works were part of the syndicate's laundering operations. Gregory's art business wasn't just a front. It was a key player in the syndicate's global network. Caroline and her family had been clueless pawns in a much bigger game, and Gregory's role had been to ensure that everything stayed under wraps. Harper dug deeper, piecing together the cryptic clues from Victoria's confession. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear that Gregory and Victoria's actions were not the result of personal vendettas or simple greed. No, they had been forced into their roles by an outside force, an invisible hand that had been pulling strings from the shadows. The missing pieces of the puzzle started to form a chilling picture. Gregory, once a charming art dealer, had been nothing more than an obedient agent for the syndicate. Victoria had been the only one who had tried to break free, but she had been too deep into the game to escape unscathed. As Harper continued to uncover the truth, she learned that Victoria's confession wasn't the final piece of the puzzle. The syndicate wasn't just a criminal organization. It had deep ties to high-ranking officials, powerful individuals, and global operatives who would stop at nothing to protect their empire. But then, a twist. One of Gregory's closest friends, who had been silent throughout the trial, came forward. He confessed that he had been complicit in the murders all along. He had been working with the syndicate, feeding information to them about Caroline's family, all to ensure that the family's wealth remained intact. But there was more. This man revealed that Gregory wasn't the only one with a deep secret. Victoria had secretly been working with someone in the highest circles of the criminal world. Her betrayal had been far more extensive than anyone realized. The truth was more complicated than Harper had ever imagined. There had been a man in the shadows all along, a shadowy figure who had been orchestrating every move in this deadly game. An influential figure with ties to the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. Harper learned that this figure had once been a close associate of Caroline's father, an ally in business who had turned to a life of crime. This man had used the Vale family as pawns in his global syndicate, and his reach had extended far beyond what anyone could have fathomed. He had been pulling strings for years, ensuring that everyone in the Vale family remained under his control. Harper stood at a crossroads. The case had grown beyond anything she had ever expected. What started as a murder investigation had now become a dangerous game of international intrigue. The syndicate's power stretched far beyond the borders of New York, and Harper was now a target herself. The breaking point came when she realized that the criminal syndicate wasn't just a problem for Caroline and her family. It was a threat to everything Harper had worked for. Her own life was now on the line, as she realized that the walls were closing in. The final confrontation came in the dead of night. Harper met the shadowy figure, an enigmatic leader of the syndicate, at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There, in the dim light, he finally revealed himself. The man who had been pulling the strings all along was none other than a former close friend of Caroline's father. The very man who had seemed to disappear years ago was alive, hiding in plain sight. Harper was face to face with the mastermind, but she wasn't afraid. She had one goal: to bring down the syndicate once and for all. In a dramatic twist, Harper's pursuit of justice finally led to the downfall of the syndicate. The evidence was undeniable, and with the help of international law enforcement, the syndicate's leaders were arrested one by one. As the empire crumbled, Harper stood victorious. But she knew that the scars of this case would remain with her forever. And as she looked out over the city, Harper realized that sometimes the darkest secrets don't stay hidden forever. The truth may be buried, but it will always find a way to rise. The city had changed in the aftermath. The fall of the syndicate was a victory, but it came at a cost. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that something remained hidden. Despite all the arrests, one key piece of the puzzle was still missing: the mastermind behind the mastermind. As Harper stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, she realized that in her pursuit of the truth, she had overlooked one crucial detail. The shadowy figure, the former close friend of Caroline's father, wasn't the true leader of the syndicate. He was simply another player, a pawn who had been used just as much as everyone else. The real power, she now realized, had always been closer to home. It started with a phone call, a strange, anonymous tip that would send Harper down an even darker path. A low voice on the other end of the line whispered, "You're not done yet. The truth is still out there." Harper's heart raced. Could it be? Had she really uncovered everything? The caller hinted at the existence of a second syndicate, one that had been operating in the shadows all along. They were smarter, more subtle than the one she had already dismantled. And this syndicate's reach was far more extensive. The higher echelons of society, politicians, billionaires, even law enforcement, had been part of it all along. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just the beginning. It wasn't long before Gregory's former associate, a man named Martin, reappeared. He had been one of the key players in the earlier investigation but had vanished after the syndicate's downfall. But now he was back, and he had a warning for Harper. Martin, looking tired and haunted, explained that the syndicate she had taken down was just the surface. It had been led by a network of wealthy individuals who had used Caroline's family to cover their illegal dealings. But they weren't finished. Far from it. The true head of this operation was someone with more resources than Harper could ever imagine. The truth that Martin revealed was enough to send shivers down Harper's spine. The second syndicate had been operating under the radar for years, using high-profile individuals to control everything from the art world to international finance. As Harper delved deeper, she discovered that the highest levels of government were involved. A well-known politician, once a close ally of Caroline's father, was at the center of this new syndicate. The man had used his political power to shield the syndicate's operations, ensuring that their activities remained hidden. But the most shocking part of it all? Harper had known him her entire life. He had been the one to offer her a job in law enforcement all those years ago. She had trusted him. The confrontation was inevitable. Harper met with the politician under the cover of darkness. Her mind raced as she tried to understand how he had deceived her so completely. "You've been in over your head from the start," the politician said, his voice smooth, calculated. "We've always been in control, Harper. You just never realized it." He was calm, almost indifferent, as if he were discussing a mere inconvenience. But Harper wasn't fooled. She knew that the syndicate's true power had been hiding behind his facade. And now, with him at the helm, it was clear. The war was far from over. Harper found herself on the defensive. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The higher the stakes, the greater the risk to her life. But she wasn't about to back down. Threats began flooding in. Anonymous text messages, strange phone calls, and then the first physical warning. A package containing photographs of Harper, taken while she was conducting her investigation. The syndicate was getting desperate, but Harper couldn't afford to hesitate. This was the breaking point. In the face of growing danger, Harper sought help from the one person she trusted, Martin. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, a coalition of former enemies who had become allies in their mutual quest for justice. With their combined knowledge of the syndicate's inner workings, they began to devise a plan to expose the true mastermind behind the operation. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. Every step they took was fraught with peril. The syndicate's reach extended far beyond what they could imagine, and the stakes had never been higher. Just when things seemed to be going according to plan, Harper received a devastating blow. Martin, her ally, had betrayed her. It wasn't long before she realized that Martin had been working with the syndicate all along. The warning signs had been there all along, but she had ignored them in her desperation to crack the case. The betrayal cut deep. Martin had played both sides, feeding Harper false information while secretly working to undermine her efforts. And now, with the syndicate closing in, he had betrayed her for the final time. The final confrontation would take place in a place where power was traded in silence. A high-stakes poker game held in the heart of the city's underworld, where the final pieces of the syndicate would be laid bare. The mastermind, Harper's former mentor, was there, sitting at the table. His eyes never left hers as he played his cards, carefully orchestrating the game. "Do you know what the stakes are, Harper?" he asked, a cold smile crossing his face. Harper didn't flinch. This was it, the last game. It was time to expose the truth once and for all. In a dramatic turn of events, Harper and her team succeeded. The final blow was dealt. The mastermind, who had orchestrated the entire operation, was arrested. The syndicate's empire was brought to its knees. But the victory felt hollow. As the mastermind was escorted into the back of a police car, he whispered, "You don't understand, Harper. This was never the end." Harper stood frozen, realizing that the war had only just begun. The victory, though hard one, had only exposed the surface. The syndicate may have fallen, but the war was far from over. In the quiet aftermath, Harper realized that the mastermind's cryptic warning had been no idle threat. The end of the empire wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The syndicate's web ran deeper than Harper could have ever imagined. Every lead she followed, every connection she uncovered, only led her to more questions. The true power behind the syndicate wasn't just in criminal hands. It was rooted in the fabric of society itself. The people she had trusted, the allies she had once counted on, had been mere pieces in a larger game. A game with no clear rules and no end in sight. Harper's every move was being watched. In the weeks after the mastermind's arrest, she found herself unable to shake the feeling that eyes were on her at all times. Someone was monitoring her, tracking her every conversation and every step. It wasn't just the syndicate she had to worry about. The same powerful people who had once been part of the organization had turned their gaze toward Harper, eager to protect what they had built. The walls were closing in on her again, but this time, she was not alone. Martin, her former ally turned traitor, had disappeared, but his betrayal had left a trail of uncertainty in its wake. Harper couldn't trust anyone, not even those closest to her. Harper stood at Caroline's grave, the cold rain soaking her coat. In the stillness, she could almost hear Caroline's voice, soft, full of questions. Had her death been the result of something more than ambition? Had she been a pawn too, just like everyone else? The truth of Caroline's life was buried under layers of deception, but as Harper stared at the gravestone, she realized that the answers lay not in the past, but in the people who had been closest to her. There were still too many unanswered questions. Too many people who had disappeared without a trace. In the quiet corners of the city's most prestigious institutions, Harper uncovered a hidden archive, one that hadn't been touched in decades. The documents within it were damning. Files of financial transactions, covert deals, and names that Harper had only seen in passing, each one more powerful than the last. As Harper pored over the records, she began to realize that the true power of the syndicate wasn't just in the art world, but in the global financial system itself. They had laundered billions through legitimate channels, hiding their operations under layers of legitimate transactions. And somewhere in those files, Harper knew, was the key to dismantling it all. The auction was held in secret, behind closed doors. It was a high society event, but this was no ordinary gathering. The artwork was no longer the focus. It was the money. The syndicate had re-emerged, and they had brought their most dangerous weapons with them, an underground network of buyers, influencers, and political elites. Harper infiltrated the auction with a fake identity, knowing that this was her chance to get closer to the syndicate's new leader. The room was filled with masked faces, each one hiding a dark secret. But as Harper approached the center of the room, she realized the most powerful person in the room wasn't just hiding their face. They were hiding their identity entirely. Harper's presence didn't go unnoticed. As she made her way through the auction, she was drawn toward a figure standing in the back, someone who stood out despite being veiled in mystery. This person was the new leader of the syndicate, a figure that even the most powerful in the room feared to acknowledge. No one knew their name, but everyone knew their power. The leader spoke in riddles, giving Harper a glimpse of the empire they controlled. "They think they know everything, but they don't even know what they're playing for," the leader said, their voice a cold whisper. "They are the puppets. We are the ones who control the strings." It was then that Harper realized she was no longer chasing the truth. She was the target. Martin had returned, but this time he wasn't offering any help. He was playing a different game now, a game of survival. "You think you've won, don't you?" Martin sneered, his eyes cold with betrayal. "You took down the old guard, but the new one is untouchable. You're just a pawn in their game now, Harper." Harper's hands shook as she realized the truth. Martin wasn't just a traitor, he was a part of the new syndicate. A fresh layer of lies had been built upon the foundations of everything she had uncovered. And now Martin was her enemy. The file was a bombshell. Inside, Harper found the key to everything, the name of the person who had been pulling the strings all along. It wasn't a politician. It wasn't a wealthy businessman. It wasn't even a criminal mastermind. It was someone within her own ranks, someone Harper had trusted implicitly. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she could have imagined. The person who had been helping her, had been guiding her, was the true mastermind behind it all. Her heart pounded as the name on the file burned into her mind. The final confrontation arrived sooner than Harper anticipated. She walked into the office, where she had expected to find an ally, but instead, she found her betrayer. Detective Benson, her closest confidant, stood by the window, looking out over the city. He turned slowly, a grim smile on his lips. "I guess the cat's out of the bag," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. Benson had been the mastermind. He had orchestrated the entire downfall of the syndicate, but only to take its place. He had played Harper like a fiddle, using her to eliminate the competition so he could seize control. Harper felt the ground beneath her feet crumble. The last person she trusted had just shattered her world. Harper's world had been torn apart, but she wasn't done yet. Her mind raced, formulating a plan that could bring Benson down once and for all. But as she stood at the precipice, she knew that her next move would decide everything. There was no going back. The final battle wasn't just about justice. It was about survival. Harper had nothing left to lose, and with her back against the wall, she was ready to face the true mastermind. This was the reckoning, and it would all come to an end tonight. Harper had just started to rebuild, piecing together the shattered fragments of her investigation, when the warning arrived. A single envelope, untouched by time, bearing no return address, only a cryptic message inside. "If you continue, You will not live to see the end. It was a direct threat from Benson's new syndicate. Harper could almost feel the walls closing in on her once again, but the message wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. They wanted her to back down, but Harper had come too far to quit now. As Harper dug deeper, she uncovered old security footage, tapes that had been hidden away by Benson's network. The footage told a story of manipulation and deceit. Benson had been playing both sides all along, feeding information to everyone involved. He had orchestrated not just the fall of the syndicate, but the creation of an even more dangerous empire in its place. The tapes revealed something far more chilling. Benson had not only been working with Caroline's father, but with other figures from the highest levels of government, stretching their influence into international politics. Harper's heart sank. She had been a pawn in a far greater game than she realized. Harper couldn't ignore the connection any longer. The politician she had once trusted, Senator Miles, the man who had guided her career, was tied to Benson in ways that defied belief. She cornered him in his office, her anger barely contained. "Did you really think you could escape your past?" she demanded. Senator Miles just smiled. "You have no idea, Harper. You never did." His cold, calculating demeanor suggested that he had never truly feared exposure. But Harper's resolve was stronger than ever. She had to stop them before they dismantled the last shred of justice left in the city. The closer Harper got to uncovering the truth, the more dangerous her path became. It wasn't just the syndicate who wanted her dead. Her closest friend, Detective Chris Hawkins, had been working with Benson all along, a mole deep within the force, feeding information to Benson. As the revelation hit her, Harper stood face to face with Chris, who was now part of the very syndicate she had been trying to bring down. "All these years, Harper. You never suspected, did you?" Chris sneered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. The truth shattered Harper. Chris had been her rock, her ally, but now he was just another enemy to be vanquished. With time running out, Harper had no choice but to make her move. Her every decision, every step, felt like a gamble. The syndicate was tightening its grip on the city, and they were aware of Harper's investigation. A bombshell that had been set in motion. The clock was ticking. Harper knew that every moment counted. In a few hours, the syndicate would launch a devastating operation that could change the city forever. It wasn't just about justice now, it was about survival. Inside the penthouse suite of Senator Miles, Harper uncovered a hidden agenda. Benson and his allies were plotting to frame her for a crime she didn't commit, one that would ruin her career, her life, and her legacy. The evidence they planted was damning, a setup that was too perfect to ignore. Harper realized that in order to survive, she would need to turn the tables on them, use their own game against them. But the stakes were high. If she failed, she wouldn't just lose her life. She'd lose everything she had worked for. In the dead of night, Harper and Benson met face-to-face in an abandoned underground garage. "You still think you can stop this, Harper?" Benson's voice echoed coldly as he stepped closer, his eyes devoid of fear. "You've underestimated me," Harper retorted, her voice steady despite the rising tension. It wasn't just a confrontation, it was a fight for the truth. Benson's smugness, his belief that he controlled everything, would be his undoing. As he lunged at Harper, she pulled the trump card she had been waiting for. A series of wiretap recordings that implicated Benson and his entire syndicate. The pieces of the puzzle were finally in place. With the tapes in hand and the syndicate's secrets laid bare, Harper had brought the walls down. Benson was arrested. Senator Miles was forced to resign. The corrupt officials who had been part of the syndicate crumbled under the weight of the evidence. But the victory felt bittersweet. Harper had lost so much: friends, trust, and pieces of herself along the way. Yet, in the end, the city began to heal. Justice was served. But at what cost? The dust had settled. The syndicate was dismantled, its leaders in prison. Harper stood on a rooftop, staring out at the city she had fought so hard to protect. But something lingered in her heart, a gnawing emptiness, a sense that no victory could ever truly heal the scars left behind. In the end, Harper had won. She had exposed the truth. She had brought down those responsible for the corruption and murder, but the shadows would always linger, and the city would never be the same. But Harper's work wasn't over yet. There were still hidden truths, pieces of the puzzle that had yet to be revealed. As she handed the final evidence over to the prosecutor, Harper knew that she had done her part, but there would always be more to uncover. Months had passed since the fall of the syndicate. The city was beginning to rebuild. Harper, though scarred by the events, had become a symbol of perseverance and justice. She had fought a battle no one could have predicted and come out victorious. The city, though shaken, was finally on the path to recovery. Justice had been served. As Harper took her final steps away from the case, she looked into the camera, her voice steady but filled with emotion. We can't always predict who will become or the battles we'll face, but we have to keep going. For the truth, for justice, for those who have no voice. The case was over, but the story would live on. And as the sun set over the city, one final truth remained. Justice, no matter how elusive or difficult, had finally been served. Stay tuned for more chilling cases on Cold Case Chronicles, where the truth is always darker than fiction. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Cold Case Chronicles. We dive deeper into the most chilling, unsolved mysteries, and together, we uncover what was left behind. Like, share, and leave a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. Stay vigilant. Stay curious. The truth never rests.